Welcome to Dead in the Night. In tonight's stories, we dive into more cryptid and monster sightings. Grab a weapon. You never know what will come after you. Here goes. Several years ago, I was on my way home from work in the financial district of Lower Manhattan. I worked in an office building a block away from Wall Street. This was late 2011. Around the time of those Occupy Wall Street protests in Zuccotti Park. The streets were packed with people wearing backpacks and headphones, carrying signs and megaphones. It was pretty much impossible not to bump into people as you tried to navigate the narrow sidewalks. The hustle wasn't anything special to me. I had my earbuds in with music playing to drown out the noises during my commute, just like any other day. I do consider myself a New Yorker through and through, after all. However, to get to the subway and back home to Queens, I had to either go around or right through Zuccotti Park, which did get a bit annoying after a while. Still, crowded streets are a part of our reality. Unfortunately, the same is true for the millions of homeless people taking refuge in the various nooks and crannies of the city. I'm not a saint or anything, but I do try at least to drop a bit of spare change in their cups every so often. I wish I could say it was every time, but it's not. I want to help when I can, but I'm embarrassed to say that I'm sometimes in such a rush that I don't even notice them there. I guess that makes me no different than the people who breeze by the needy without giving the poor souls even a single glance. Sometimes, it's as if the homeless are an invisible element in our cities, subsisting on the scraps left behind by those more well-off. I think that may be the reason what happened that afternoon, right amid crowds of people, was able to go unnoticed. I don't think anyone but I realized or even cared about what was happening. The park was too crowded for me to walk through. So instead of trying to fight my way across to the subway, I decided to circle and try a different stop in a quieter area. To get there, I cut into a side street that was significantly less busy. The moment I set foot there, I was struck with a feeling of heaviness and dread that instantly plunged my previously decent mood into an abyss. I couldn't understand why or where it was coming from, so I pulled out my earbuds and turned my music off. I felt I needed my senses to be as sharp as possible for whatever danger I was sensing. As I tucked the earbuds away in my coat pocket, a pungent odor began to creep into my nose. It was the smell that hits you when you walk into a subway car that a homeless person has made their home. I looked ahead toward the corner of one of the buildings to see a surprisingly young man in torn-up jeans and a hoodie. He had wild black hair and a long, unkempt beard. He rocked back and forth with a look of utter hopelessness etched into his face. He clutched a small cardboard sign covered in writing. I picked out a section that read, "Help please, Army vet. Lost everything. I need $40 to get back home." There were very few people walking down that particular street, but enough were passing through that he would occasionally pop out from his corner with his arms outstretched holding the sign, begging for acknowledgement. It was a sad sight to behold. I felt terrible knowing that I had nothing on me to spare, so I would inevitably end up being one of those people myself, walking by him without seeming to care at all. Just as that thought crossed my mind, I saw an odd-looking man further down the road, walking toward the homeless guy. The strange man stopped and crouched down to the homeless one's level. After staring at him a moment, the stranger reached into his pocket and pulled out a large roll of cash, holding it out in front of him as if to offer it, but holding back. It was a bizarre sight, especially in New York City, but at least I no longer felt guilty for being unable to help the poor guy. I wish things went as you would expect from that point on, but unfortunately, that's where things began to get weird. To be honest, I've been building up this long preamble because every time I think back to this event, a A sharp chill runs down my spine, and I swear my eyes tear up. So, as I continued to walk toward the pair, I realized that everything, like the world around me, began to slow down somehow. The loud noises of city streets faded into a soup of auditory blur. Every sound was muffled as if I was holding my hands over my ears or had my head underwater. I realized I was staring at the strange man holding the wad of cash as this was happening. I noticed how ordinary he was. Everything about him was plain. He was dressed like any white-collar worker. A simple or slightly ugly brown suit hung loosely on his slender frame. He wore a tie and dress shoes and carried a generic leather briefcase. He also had a matching brown hat on his head, angled to hide the top half of his face. Looking back, I wished that was all I had seen. As I slowly made my way closer to them, the stranger lifted. He had to meet the confused gaze of the homeless man. That's when I stopped dead in my tracks. The formerly bland appearance of the man became more apparent to me, and I noticed two haunting features. His skin was a bizarre, ashen white. Not paper white, but not entirely gray either. His eyes, they were a deeper black than I could ever describe. I tried my best to rationalize what I was seeing. A guy wearing black contacts and a business suit would be a little weird, but I'm sure it wouldn't be the first time someone made those particular fashion choices out in NYC. I can tell you this though, a regular guy dressed that way would not be enough to stop a New Yorker in their tracks as it did me. It was more than the look of him. It was the feeling I got from it. It was like being punched in the chest. As a child, I dealt with frequent asthma attacks, and as an adult, I've had more than my share of panic attacks. But this was something else entirely. Much worse. A heavy, nauseating feeling was born in the pit of my stomach and crawled up my chest before nesting in my throat. The air had become solid around me as I stood there frozen. I could see in my peripheral vision that other people were still walking by through the side street, although they moved in slow motion. After a few moments, the strange man and the homeless man's voices seemed to emerge from the muffled white noise of the rest of the city. Their voices slowly became more straightforward and more transparent. I missed a lot of what was being said, but certain words stood out. I don't want to die. The words shuddered from the homeless man's mouth as he reached for the money. His eyes were fixed on the roll of cash, yet steeped in hesitation and fear. The stranger smiled at him. And I swear to you, Mr. X, something about that smile made me want to scream. It was at that moment I realized I couldn't cry even if I wanted to. I could do nothing but stand there helplessly, my feet nailed to the concrete sidewalk as the scene played out just a few yards in front of me. The stranger's response was chilling. "Oh, well, you're going to die either way, Robbie." Judging by the homeless man's reaction, that must have been his name. At the mention of his name, Robbie sat straight up with a look of slack-jawed amazement, tinged with horror. Side note, in the future, I'll refer to the man in the brown suit as Brown. This will be important in a few moments. So, before Robbie could say anything, Brown lifted his hand, as if to give an important presentation, and spoke again. His voice was just so wrong. I can only describe it as oily, gravelly and wet, like someone trying to talk through a mouthful of phlegm. If you think the description sounds gross, imagine how foul it made me feel hearing it. Brown, question is, do you want to die happy and comfortable, wanting nothing? Or here in this alley, where will no one even notice until you've been rotting a while? I still don't know how that scream didn't fly out of my mouth after what happened next. If I could have moved at all, I might have jumped right out of my skin. A third voice chimed in before its corresponding figure stepped into my view. Another strange man, nearly identical to Brown except taller, and somehow even thinner and wearing a grey suit. I'll call this one Grey for the sake of organization. Grey held a lit cigarette and stared down at Robbie with a tired ambivalence. Take the money, Robert. We have things to do. Robbie nodded with a resigned expression as he took the cash. He gasped as he clawed at the bills, unfurling a surprising amount. This is so much, he exclaimed. I couldn't make out what was said next. I saw Brown stand up next to Grey, followed by Robbie standing, and gathering his few possessions from the ground before thanking the two strange men and briskly walking toward me. He brushed past me in a hurry, thanking God over and over again, crying. I still couldn't move. I was stuck there as the two strangers' gaze fell onto me when Robbie was out of sight. The two sets of pitch-black eyes staring at me gave me the distinct feeling of being watched by something not human. Their mouths moved as if speaking to each other, but I couldn't make it out. The volume of the white noise around me was going crazy, up and down. It was disorienting. Eventually, I could hear a few bits of their conversation, but the language was unlike anything I'd ever heard. Now think about this. I speak fluent Spanish and understand bits of many other languages. Italian, French, a little Japanese, Arabic, and even some Yiddish. You tend to pick up little things here, and they're living in New York. I can certainly place a language roughly when hearing it. What the strangers were speaking was unlike anything I'd ever encountered. The sounds they were making weren't even sounded that people made. It caused me physical pain in my ears when I began to hear it. Like when your ears pop on an airplane. The feeling when you know there's pressure there, but you can't get it out, so it stings. The pain got so bad I wanted to vomit. Brown snarled a word his friend in the same wet voice. Groan. English. Grey made a bizarre clicking noise, smiling the same horrific smile Brown did earlier. That far gone, huh? It'll be fine, Brown responded. Yeah? Then why'd you lie? What Brown said next still keeps me up some nights, even all these years later. He rolled his shoulders back and grunted. Does it matter? I'll be wearing that stupid chimp by the next moon clicking noise. My eyes began to well with tears as I tried desperately to look away. I was still paralyzed. Slowly, the world started to creak back toward average speed again. Mr. X, I'm telling you, I'm trying so hard not to cry as I sit here typing this. Just like the plight of Robbie. Or any other homeless person, no one bothered to even look at me as I stood there in terror. People were there moving slower than usual, at least from my perspective, but no one stopped or noticed I was in trouble. Grey looked directly at me. Chime. My head started swimming, and I immediately felt dizzy. My vision blurred, and I lost focus on all except one thing, Grey's voice. Well now, look what this one can do. Cute. Suddenly, Brown stepped forward from the blur in my eyes. His black-eyed face sneered at me from mere inches away. Whatever. A chimp's a chimp. They're all the same. Hey, you, chimp, leave, now. He snarled again, and I felt it in my bones. Keep walking. I wish I could tell you what happened next, but the next thing I knew, I wasn't standing on the sidewalk. Up at Columbus Circle in Midtown, almost a half-hour's walk north of where I was. I didn't know a man was holding my shoulders as random people passed by with concerned looks on their faces. When things came back into focus, I could finally hear the man's voice. Regular voice. Yo, you all right, son? He asked with a trembling voice, damn near walked into traffic. Man, you okay? Must be on drugs. Someone yelled out as they hurried by. I told the man I was okay as tears began to run freely down my face. I apologized and fled the scene, rushing over to the escalator to the train, having no idea how I got so far uptown. By the time I got home, I had realized I wouldn't be able to tell anyone, not even my wife. she'd think I was losing my mind. I haven't seen those strange men, or whatever they were, since that day. I thank God for that. Over the years, I've researched the paranormal to try and identify what they may have been, but I haven't found anything with their description of actions. I heard of black-eyed kids, and the vibes people seem to get from them are similar to how I felt with brown and gray, but the situation overall was different. These were grown, at least middle-aged males, I think. I don't know what I saw. It still messes with me. I've been to therapy about this and have tried rationalizing, but no luck. Whatever the case, I can say that nowadays I can go about my daily life without thinking about that incident. Whenever I allow myself to reflect on it, it shakes me up. And I'm not immune to late nights of insomnia for fear of nightmares. I still question my sanity every so often. After hearing some of the stories on your channel, I wondered if anyone else might have seen these things. In my research and experience, I find cinnamon seems to work to ward off mimics. It worked for the family of a friend of mine. That's the reason I'm writing to you today. I'll explain. This happened when I was a little girl in the early 90s, maybe around 93. I had a friend named Sandy. Sandy was an only child until the birth of her sister Fee. When Sandy was about 7 years old, her parents decided to take a cross-country road trip to Disney World in Florida. The family had a great time at the park, but as many of us know, the days went by in a blur. I guess the human mind can only take so much childlike wonder and amazement before the memories start to run together. Before she knew it, Sandy and her family were packing up the minivan to head back home. This is where things got weird. As they finally made it home and unpacked their things, there was something wrong. Sandy noticed that somehow, there was no longer just one feed but two. She didn't trust either of them, getting a strange feeling that each of the 2-year-old girls was aware of some hidden deception. Shortly after their return, Sandy's parents began going out and purchasing duplicate furniture pieces to accommodate the new addition to the family. I remember talking to her, and us both being confused about the whole thing, even with our young, usually carefree minds. For quite a while, her parents simply referred to both girls as Fee, but eventually, they took to calling one of them Key. Here's where the cinnamon came in. Sandy's mother used to make her favorite cookies, snickerdoodles. After Key showed up, Sandy complained that her mom never made them anymore. Cinnamon is a key ingredient. Unfortunately, any traces of cinnamon vanished from the house before we noticed. When Key was about 4 years old, the 4 of us were at a mutual friend's house eating cereal. Key tried a piece of our friend's grain that was flavored with cinnamon sugar. She quickly spat it out, saying that it was Ike. However, as she recoiled and grimaced, I noticed that she began to undergo some alarming changes. Her tongue and lips blackened, and the texture seemed to shift to something less than human briefly. It was as if her skin had become charred and burned, with the blackness spreading across her lower jaw and up to her nose before retracting back to normal with frightening speed. The only reason I noticed it was because I was so distrustful of her. I usually found myself staring at her with a constant sense of suspicion. Fee, the original one, I think, had been eating the cereal by the handful. Then finally, Key started crying and knocked the grain out of her sister's grasp, making her wash her hands before dragging her back to their house down the street. Sandy's mother forbade her children from visiting the place after that based on something Key told her. We never found out what. The weirdest part of all this is that Sandy's parents never acknowledged the weirdness of all this. The mysterious appearance of an extra child in their home, the apparent lack of preparation that made them have to go out and buy duplicates of everything, and so many other effects. Key could make her presence seem so unextraordinary. Eventually, I lost touch with Sandy and her strange family after a series of bitter fights and arguments between her and me. We ripped each other to shreds emotionally. I didn't see them again until the late 90s when my brother died. For some reason, he had developed an intense hatred of me. I found out that Fee had constantly been sick with cases of flu and other disorders over the years. No one knew exactly why. Sandy finally moved away when her parents divorced. Please share this story because I would hate for anyone to end up like Sandy's parents, having one of their children, indeed mimicked, with no knowledge of the original one. What's even worse is that a mimic can tie its life force with its victim. And in that case, they really will have an extra child. One that's secretly a demonic parasite with an extreme allergy to cinnamon. When I was around 5 or 6 years old, my family lived in a small 2-story home near Omaha, Nebraska. Imagine if you were standing out in front, facing the house, you would see that the lonely street light was off to the left, and my room was on the right side, sitting in the house's shadow. Before I explain what I saw, I have to give you a quick side note. The kids at my school used to say that my eyes turned red when I got angry, so they gave me a very hurtful nickname. One day, when I got home from school, I saw it written with markers on my bedroom window. Big jagged letters scrolled out the word demon across the glass. I couldn't believe someone went into so much trouble to do that to me. They used a ladder we kept around the back of the house. It hadn't been moved in ages and was covered with weeds and dirt, so it left clear signs against the wall below my window. I got so mad that I hit the window with a rock and shattered it. My father had to cover it with a garbage bag and some duct tape. Anyway, it was a summer night, close to midnight, when I got up to go to the bathroom. Despite it being so late, I was awake and full of energy, so I decided to sneak and play video games in my room. About an hour later, around 1 a.m., out of nowhere, I heard a faint scream coming from outside. I could tell it was a woman. Scared but still curious, I ran downstairs to look out the window in the living room. But I was shocked when I realized that the whole room was bathed in red light. As I surveyed the surreal environment, it felt like an alien world, even though it was full of the furniture and items I saw and enjoyed every day. Finally, I looked up to see that the windows were all covered, essentially plastered with some paper-like material that seemed to be soaked in blood-red liquid. I ran back up to my room and carefully climbed up on the sill, peering through the unbroken part of the window so as not to be noticed. What I saw, just at the edge of the circle of light on the street, was the shape of a man crouching over a woman who lay motionless on the ground. The man wore an orange short-sleeved shirt and what looked like jeans, but the girl was dressed in business casual attire, a white collared shirt with a black skirt and stockings. I saw a streak of blue in her otherwise brown hair. The man looked up, and his face was so pale that it stood in contrast to the darkness around him. A dark red speared and stained his mouth and face, and that's when I realized I was looking at a vampire. As the shock and fear began to build in my mind, he turned his head directly toward me with a startled look. He glared at me before sweeping the girl up from the ground and dashing away with such incredible speed. It didn't seem natural at all, even to my childlike mind. I went back downstairs after he left and saw that the windows were back to normal. The next day, I went over to the spot where the attack had occurred and saw streaks of blood on the pavement, along with a silver necklace. I took the chain and cleaned it up. I still have it to this day. The crazy thing is, following the incident, I began to have nightmares of my hands being drenched in blood. Those soon evolved into dreams where everything in my house would be spattered with it. My bed, the floor, the ceiling, and the walls. It was like I was living in a slaughterhouse. A few days later, I woke up and had a bite mark on my arm. The mark was deep enough that it drew blood, so I showered and covered it up, doing my best to keep it hidden because I knew no one would believe me, and I already had a reputation for being a demon at my school. On top of that, I knew my mother would have thought I was cutting myself, and I didn't want the trouble. I guess I was pretty stupid back then. I don't know what I saw, and I know I was very young, but I truly believe the man was a vampire. If you enjoyed the stories and my narration, be sure to hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel out a ton. Also, don't forget to like, comment, and keep your eyes out for unadulterated horror narrated by yours truly. Stay scared, everyone.